Okay, so there was a question about these frequently distributions, and it's a multiple part question about relative frequency, percentage, there's the bar charts, and then there is even a pie chart, right? And so what I wanted to do is to show you just how to get these in StatCrunch, right? Because you can click on the open in StatCrunch and try and get each of these. So I took this data and I put it over here. And so what I'm going to do is take the frequency and turn it into a relative frequency. So what I need first is the total, right? So probably the easiest thing to do is to come over to data and click on compute, and then we're going to click on expression. And what we're going to do is we're going to sum up, which is a function that's going to add everything together, the frequency, and I'm going to add that column, and then I'm going to close it up. So I'm going to sum everything in that frequency column, okay? And I click on compute, and I see that there are 13,455 total instances of these types of weapons that were recorded, right? To get the relative frequency, you have to take the frequency and divide it by the total. So what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to go over to data, I'm going to go over to compute, I'm going to go over to expression, I'm going to click on build again, and what I want to do is I want to take the frequency, add the column, and divide it by the 13,455, right? So 13,455. Now, once I do that and I click on OK, this column label, I'm just going to call that relative frequency, okay? And then I click on compute, and you will see that the relative frequency is right here. So 3147. And so if I look, 3147, and then you'll have 1147. And so if I go, there's 1148. Well, I guess it rounds, right? So the 5 is going to make the 7 and 8. 0464. 0464. So we've got those. Now, obviously, homicides committed using a firearm. I look at the firearms here. The relative frequency just gets multiplied by 100. And so that turns a relative frequency into a percentage. Now, I could do that, right? I could go back to data, compute expression, excuse me, and I could take the relative frequency, add that column, and multiply it by 100. And then I could call that column label the percent. And then I click on compute, and then there's the 71.46%, 1147. And so those are the percentages. So that would be one way of handling this. Now, when we construct a bar graph, here's what I'm going to show you. I don't normally do this in StatCrunch. What I would typically do is I would go straight to the bar plot, and in the bar plot, I don't have data, I have the summary, okay? You're like, wait a minute, but I do have data. But the firearms are summarized, and it's telling you that there are 9,616. Otherwise, you would have a column that said firearms, 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 right? And it would literally say this 9,616 times. And then it would say cutting or 1,000. And I would have 13,455 rows of data if this was with data. It's not. This is a summary of the data. So under graph for bar plot, I'm going to click on summary. The category is the type of weapon, and the counts are in the frequency. Now, you will notice that there's a frequency, there's a relative frequency, and there's a percentage. If I click on relative frequency and I go ahead and sort it by the worksheet, so in order that it is in this column, and I put the value over the bar, watch what happens. I end up with firearms with the 0.717, and in fact, if you hover over it, it will give you all of the decimal places. If I hover over personal weapons, it'll give me out to 4 decimal places. If I hover over the hands, fist, feet, right, it'll be there. So you can totally get the relative frequency with the bar chart, and that's typically how I do it. You can also get the percentage, and again, you just keep the value over the bar. I click on compute, and there is the 71%, 71.47%, right? Rounding to 2 decimal places. So that's probably the way that I would do it. Now, if you look, it says, hey, construct the frequency bar graph. Well, we just did that. And if you look, there were, let's see, let's go back to frequency, right? And we look, and there are 9,000 of those in firearms, and then everything else is pretty small. So I look, I've got almost 9,000 in firearms. Everything else is pretty small. So it looks like knives are taller than personal weapons, but other weapons is even taller. So what I want to look and say, other, and then knives. So see, knives is too short here. Personal is too tall here. Here we have firearms. Oh, but firearms is too small. So firearms is almost 10,000, and then knives and other are the highest, and then personal is the lowest. So that's why this one is the correct one right here. Now, if you want to construct a relative bar chart, that's perfectly easy, right? I'm going to hit edit, and then I'm going to change this to relative, and I click on compute, and you can see the relative frequency. So I need 71%, and then again, knives and other are going to be higher than personal. So I need a 71%, and knives and other have to be higher. I need a, there's 50, that's not quite right, 50, 60, 70, I need a 70%, and then knives or other are higher than the personal. So that's why this one is the correct one right here. And then we need a pie chart, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this out so we have the screen open. And again, right underneath bar plot is a pie chart. Again, it is a summary of the data. The categories are the type of weapon, and the counts are in frequency. And then you have count and percent total that's on the display. I'm just going to leave the percent of total, right? There's some fun stuff you can do down here, but we're not going to do that today. I click on compute, and you can see firearms is the largest, with knives being and other weapons, right? So you've got this little corner over here. So that's what I want to look for. I want to look for a big blue and then a red green. Okay, I'm going to call that like mustard. Maybe it's not. I don't know. So blue, red, green, mustard. We've got blue and then red, green, mustard. And that looks pretty good. Red, green, mustard. Oh, the mustard's got to be a little smaller, right? Right? Mustard is... Oh! So this is going in sort of an order. I don't know why this personal weapons is here, but that mustard one is supposed to be in the middle. I don't know why it's not. Let's see. Oh, worksheet. There we go. You want to have it in order of the worksheet, otherwise it'll do something strange. So here's the firearms, and then red, and then the tiny yellow, right? So here's the blue, and then the two big ones with the little one in the middle. That's why it's this one, okay? If you look, this one's firearms, knives, personal. These are the knives is too small. Here the firearms is too small. Here the firearms is too small. So, and actually the firearms is too big here. So this one is the actual only right one just based on firearms. And that gets you to the end of the question. And that really helps you understand how to use StatCrunch for this type of question.